Just generally, as I said, I'm happy to be at the conference, and that a lot of conferences are now coming back after the pandemic, because before that we had mostly online events. Unfortunately, wasn't able to come to Warsaw, but hopefully next time I'll be there. This talk is going to be about new Alice adventures and how she kind of came back to the world of pods and higher order functions. Basically, I had multiple talks around Alice adventures, and those adventures kind of covered different range of topics from Kubernetes, Scala, MLOps, Kubeflow. All of them in some way rotate around Kubernetes. So this time, Alice is kind of going to travel back to that world, but she's going to use Zio for her purposes. And before we kind of dive into it, we'll have like a short recap of what happened before, because there is like a connected storyline, although there is a different type of tech stack used. But after that, we'll kind of dive deeper into the story. So I'm Roksolana. I work as engineering manager at Captify. Also, I'm Women Who Code Kyiv data engineering lead, and I often speak at various Scala conferences and meetups. So what happened in kind of previous sort of episodes or talks when Alice just traveled for the first time to this world, and kind of where we are at right now in terms of the storyline. So she kind of went to that world through kind of a hole in the backyard when she traveled to her relatives, and she uncovered this functional forest. In the forest, she met higher the functions, the first pods, Kafka 0 and Kafka 1, and over that adventure, she learned just general concepts of Kubernetes, about CRDs, basic objects, and she created a magic database setup just to sort of store the memories of this trip. And in the end of that adventure, she decided to kind of steal the pod from one of these kind of cluster database setup and the persistent volume that held the information about this kind of whole world that she met. So then we kind of skipped to 2 years later. Alice became a successful Scala developer, and she kind of totally forgot about her adventure and what happened. So she was just into work, and when she traveled back again to the relatives in the forest, she uncovered a cave where one of those magic DB pods that she stole was still kind of staying, and she realized that for 2 years he's been staying in this world, and he was eager to come back, and therefore she really wanted to help him come back home, and that's when she decided to explore the concept of CRDs. And she created like a launcher for him and sent him back to his world. The next thing that happened is that 3 months later, she kind of switched more to the data engineering role. One of her colleagues in data science team asked to help with deployment of machine learning model, and she did that via Kubeflow. But the main outcome in terms of the story in that case was that she got this kind of message which indicated that pods and higher order functions are in great danger. And that's why where we kind of come back to the story of the pods and higher order functions, and to the same world where she traveled for the first time. So 5 days later, on the Halloween night, she has a very kind of vivid and weird dream where she meets the caterpillar and Mad Hatter. And the caterpillar gives her a riddle, which is basically kind of the way she processes information from all her previous findings. So via this riddle, they work together with Mad Hatter. He builds a machine learning pipeline. She's able to use Kubernetes to deploy it and build kind of the whole setup for machine learning pipeline. And in the end of it, the pipeline helps her to get the answers for the riddle. So when she wakes up, she can like figure out whether it was a dream or reality, because in the end, she has this message that the past is the key to the future. And therefore, she understood that she needs to kind of dig deeper in the past of that world to understand what happened there. and why she got this message that the pods are in danger. One day later, while she was kind of distracted with work, she learned about Delta Lake, and she decided to apply it to the persistent volume that she had still from the first adventure. And in that kind of events of the persistent volume storage, she saw what happens in the past, like the pods that she created, and that there was some event by which basically all pods got lost. And therefore, she needed to uncover what exactly happened right there. So there are like multiple events, like the whole timeline of the creation of this world. Some of those she didn't know about because she just traveled kind of in one point of time 2 years ago. And now someone is sort of deleting the pods or they are disappearing. So the main thing for her is to try to understand what's happening there. So Alice now kind of works from home with her cat. And 3 days later, after this discovery about the past of the pods, she realized that she needs to find a way to get back to that world. And it's not necessarily possible to do that via that same route that she did on her first adventure, because she kind of discovered it completely accidentally. And therefore, she was not sure that she'll be able to find it again. So she had lots of doubts, and she was trying to distract herself with work. Plus, she didn't really know how exactly she can help the pods, not only kind of not having enough knowledge what's happening there, but also just generally how she can apply her skills there. And then she got some message from anonymous person that there is some way that she can help her friends. So Alice tried to kind of acquire this information and understand how she can do that. And basically this anonymous person mentioned that there is like another way to travel to that world, which Alice didn't know about. And there is actually like a passage close to her. So he can provide the instructions and tell her how to get there. The main kind of caveat here was that, well, it's kind of person wasn't anonymous, so she didn't know who did that, and also she didn't know whether she can trust this person. So basically she just needed to kind of either dismiss this possibility or try to find this route, and maybe it's going to get her to that world. So she kind of took the instructions and decided to follow them just to see if it's trustworthy in some way. And she went like for a walk in the park near the office. And as soon as she was kind of walking in the proper direction, the forest got darker and darker. And at the end of the route, she saw that this door with kind of shining light. And she realized that that might be kind of something related to actually traveling to that world. And maybe that person was telling the truth. So she was really surprised to actually see the door in the forest. And well, Alice is quite, she's not afraid of many things. So that's why she just followed that route. And she found herself in the functional forest, practically like the same spot as 2 years ago. So she was sort of happy that she got there, but at the same time still a bit lost in terms of what to do. And then the pods came to meet her, which were kind of the same pods that met her for the first time 2 years ago in the functional forest. And those were Kafka 0 and Kafka 1. So Alice asked them kind of what happened, because she needed to have some kind of backstory. And they mentioned that it's actually quite a long story. So on the way to kind of their safe place, which is a functional cave, as they called it, they propose to kind of tell a story, and then they'll be able to build some kind of plan to do that. But they were really happy that Alice kind of came for the rescue. So what happened basically after Alice left that world and after she helped the pod to come back there, it was just a few months ago that some kind of political movement started in that pod world. And some pods decided to kind of separate from others, proclaiming freedom to the pods and kind of have some kind of separate territory within that Kubernetes world. And at some point, some pods, like the same pods from this movement, started to disappear. So others didn't really know whether it's an anomaly or whether they kind of found this place where they decided to live separately from others. And therefore, it was just happening and happening. More and more pods disappeared, and that's basically the event that Alice registered. And on one of the days, someone set the Kubernetes factory on fire. It's kind of the factory in the main city, which helps to create multiple objects like pods. And a set of pods, like the ones that she met, actually found out that it's much safer to stay in the functional forest, which is sort of functional side of the world, and just from there build some kind of plan and do something about it. So Alice was not sure what she can do with all of that, because she did have like tools to use functional concepts and Kubernetes, but she didn't know like whether she should build something or kind of investigate. But the pods already had some kind of plan, so they said that she can do a lot of things, and that she can use actually ZL Kubernetes to do that. Well, Alice never actually tried it out, but she used quite a bit of various libraries, both like Java-based or Scala-based with Kubernetes in the past, when she built CRDs and simple objects. So she was kind of confident that all that skill set is going to help her understand what to do here. So first of all, she looked into kind of documentation and the sort of intro into Zero Kubernetes library. And what she discovered is that it's a client for the Kubernetes API. So it kind of allows to work with basic Kubernetes API, where you have pods, stateful sets, deployments, and so on. And for custom resources, there is a code generation, which is quite convenient because there is no need to define CRDs specifically in the files and then kind of read them with Scala programming language, building this link in between Kubernetes YAML files and Scala. But instead, the code generation feature can be used. And there is also support for operators, which could be useful to kind of build from the custom resources, because operators rely a lot on the custom resources. So talking about ZIL and Kubernetes internals, first of all, there is like a handwritten base code just for major library functionalities. And there is a generated code. So since it's a client to Kubernetes API, instead of writing a class that kind of describes the pod and all the features around it, like metadata, name, namespace, and so on, instead of that, the library allows to auto-generate this code in Scala from the API directly, which is quite convenient. And it means that there is like no need to go through the source code just in case or write it down yourself. So this functionality could be reused. Plus, kind of CRDs are easier to work with. So the setup looked quite simple. There is a dependency for Zero Kubernetes client, and also SHTTP client should be used because, well, basically HTTP is used there as well. So Alice saw that it shouldn't be way too hard to try out doing at least something simple just to see if kind of this route works at all. So right now we're kind of at the point when there is no specific hypothesis, but at least this route or means to an end should be kind of tested and tried out. So what she did is she set up Kubernetes cluster config, which is defined with also type safe config. So she defined like a Hocon format file where she set up all the environment variables. And that's kind of a safer way than doing it directly through the code or actually like defining the config. And instead, she can read it kind of from this Hocon file. And the interesting thing here is the last line where kind of the pods are defined with client and cluster. And here there is this technique which is sort of called layering in the Kubernetes library. So in other libraries, you usually just create objects and that's it. And they're kind of available everywhere. While in Zero Kubernetes library, it's possible to specify where exactly this object should be available, like on the client level, maybe like in specific namespace. So that helps to separate the objects and have kind of different areas of responsibility for the app when it's necessary. So she decided just to check actually if she can retrieve some kind of pod, just setting up like a name of that pod, the namespace to look for. And in the case of Zero Kubernetes, she should kind of provide this name of the pod and then set up some error handling in case of kind of name missing from generally like that namespace specifically. And also she should check for like errors like when the pod name doesn't exist. So there is a bit of kind of error handling, which also other libraries don't have much. So in Zero Kubernetes, there is a possibility to manage different kinds of failures when different Kubernetes functions are used. So she just called this method called getPod in default namespace. Default because it's actually the name of the Kubernetes city where kind of the factory was. So it was called default namespace city. And she decided to look for the pod called MagicDB Cluster 1. This is actually sort of a brother of the pod that she saved, kind of the one that she sent back from her world to this one. So she was pretty sure that this pod is supposed to be like right here in this namespace, staying here. So like hypothetically, this function could work. So she was like really hopeful because that would actually indicate what kind of pods got missing and which ones didn't. But then she wasn't able to find the pod, and the other pods suggested that actually maybe those kind of missing pods were not destroyed, possibly they were moved to another namespace. But in order to find out, she should do like the same thing, just looking for a pod, and she didn't know the name of that namespace, so she decided just to kind of do some brute force solution by just randomly proposing the names. And then she realized that she sort of remembered that slogan of that kind of politically organized pods, and those were like freedom to the pods. So she tried different combinations, and with this one, she was able to kind of try it out. And the same pod, but in another namespace, as you can see by the call of the message. And she found out that there is a pod actually, and it was running, so kind of still alive. And the age indicated that this is exactly the same pod that she created like 2 years ago. So now she wanted to figure out what's sort of happening with this pod by looking into the logs of the pod. And that's why she defined this tail logs function where the name of the pod should be provided as well as the container name kind of within the pod, since we have Docker images for each of the object. So she provided this name and she defined that it's going to work specifically in pod's freedom namespace. And then she was able to kind of put the lines from the logs directly into console, which is kind of a quite fast way to do that because other libraries use techniques with sort of hooks or watches on the logs, and that is not like always convenient to build as well because some additional entity should be created to just look into those logs. So she called this method called tail logs for the MagicDB cluster 1, and so what she got is that there is no like data storage location. And since the nature of MagicDB cluster is in general that it was a CRD, which stored all of the data in persistent volume. And persistent volume existed in this namespace, while that pod kind of was in pod's freedom namespace. Therefore, like there was a possibility that she can still access the logs of this pod, like she can see the error there. But she can't find like a storage location because basically persistent volume and the pod are in different namespaces, so they can't access each other. But that was quite a kind of weird situation that this setup could possibly work in some way. So she thought maybe like the most simple approach would be to just move the pod from one namespace to another. And Kubernetes doesn't allow kind of to do that as a functionality within. So what she decided to do, like just try out this simple approach with setting the namespace to a different one. But in reality, of course, it didn't work. The pod didn't move to the namespace like from pod's freedom to default. So she decided to try out her favorite approach. But before that, she wanted to kind of have a view in terms of what she understood about this library and what she can do from there. So first of all, was that there is much less boilerplate code. The functions are smaller, and she can do much more complicated things like tailing the logs or looking for some specific pod plus error handling in kind of less steps, and it looks more concise, and it's not the sort of Java-like code which some of the libraries provide. Also, there is like this layering technique which allows to separate different namespaces, for example, which is great, or view objects only of specific type. And there is also code generation. So code generation, like I mentioned, allows to use some simple objects from the API, and it allows to work effectively with CRDs. And that was the approach that Alice decided to try out, since she kind of often doesn't want to rely on the general API. She wants to build something more complex, like a custom resource definition. So she decided that she needs to build something to move the pod, but she wasn't sure yet what exactly. But before we kind of dive into it, just a short notice that custom object is an extension of Kubernetes API, in which we have a sort of general objects like pods, deployments, replica sets. So custom objects is sort of anything that anyone can imagine, which they can create within Kubernetes and create a type for this object, because usually the types are, again, defined in Kubernetes API. So we can run any kind of job or workload with the objects of specific type to this workload, like Spark jobs, for example. And therefore, the extension means that a library is supposed to have some kind of extension or additional functionality as well to handle this kind of objects. Because again, initially the code generation works only for the API itself. So she figured out that she can, first of all, define in YAML file the CRD instead of using some boilerplate code. So she defined this CRD, which is, again, API extension, defined the name of it. So what she decided to create is actually a namespace train, sort of a means to cross in between namespaces, a group being transport, and the version is number 1, just in case of any kind of rolling upgrades in the future and changes, that then the version can gradually change to 2 and so on, what's necessary in those cases. And the CRD has these properties, which is Docker image called magic train. Replicas here means the number of the pods for the CRD, which is like 2, just to get this started with some bunch of the pods. The scope is within the default namespace, and the plural and singular types are defined simply to kind of reference them easier in any commands or code. And the kind of the object, as I mentioned, is also custom. So in this case, it's NS train. So she defined this custom object, and now she needed to use functionalities of the Kubernetes library to actually use this object. So what she uncovered is that she just needs to add SBT plugin ZIL Kubernetes CRD and enable the plugin for code generation to actually specifically custom resource code generation, so that she wouldn't have to parse a YAML file or build her own class from the CRD, and she could just automatically read the YAML file, and the library is going to understand that it's actually CRD, and she can work with it in the same way as she worked with the pods. So what happened next is that she kind of decided to get this object that she created just to check if this link sort of works. So she kind of decided to do that within Pod's freedom namespace, just to see if she can kind of traverse something, calling it from default namespace and pushing it to Pod's freedom namespace. So she was kind of very nervous whether it's going to work or not. But then kind of the lights started to flash and they went out. So she was like really surprised regarding what's happening there. And in the darkness there, she asked the pods like what's happening. And they mentioned that in the last few months, with all those anomalies of disappearing pods, some kind of blackout started to happen from time to time. So either it was kind of someone trying to stop her from doing this, or those were just anomalies of that world, but it wasn't like clear directly why it's happening and who's kind of working with that and pushing the lights to go out. So she decided to just push the solution again and try it out, and maybe she'll kind of get into this time period when this is going to work and her namespace train is basically going to travel from default namespace to Pod's freedom. But then something or someone set the computer on fire and kind of blew out, and the routes to doing that were cut out. So the story is kind of to be continued, this abrupt end, and hopefully in the future, Alice is going to try out another approach, or we'll be able to test this one and build from there. And we'll use an operator to try to build something more complicated to traverse those namespaces. Thank you for attention. Here's my contact info. That's my Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn, and SpeakerDeck. On SpeakerDeck, you can find the slides for this talk, as well as all the previous talks if you want to kind of dive deeper into previous adventures where she worked with Kubeflow, with other libraries for Scala and Kubernetes, and just generally to follow the story as well. And also I'm Ukrainian, so if you'd like to kind of support Ukraine, feel free to donate. It's always helpful. And again, thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to hear your questions.